everyone, welcome back to another Patchwork Adventures video. If you haven't seen any of the others in this series, we've been focusing on English paper piecing so far, and we've looked at different English paper piecing techniques. We are going to leave English paper piecing for a while, and we're going to look at some blocks that we create with strips. So I'm going to start using some strips of fabric. I've got my backing block here. This is just an off-white quilting cotton, and this is a piece that is 7 inches square, so I'm working in inches for this one. I've also got a heat erase pen, some embroidery scissors, an inch quilting ruler. This is the only one I've got, everything else is in centimetres. I've got some applique pins, some machine cotton. I've just got a normal sharps needle just off camera. You could use a quilting needle. I find them quite small to work with. And then I've cut some strips of fabric, and ideally you want a lighter coloured fabric and a darker coloured fabric because we're going to make a very particular kind of block. I've cut these 1 inch wide and the width of the fabric, so I've literally just cut a 1 inch strip off the edge of the fabric, and the same with this one. This one I think might be a vintage Liberty quilting cotton. Could be wrong, it does look Liberty. I was gifted this ages ago. I've had it in my stash for quite a long time. It's not Tana lawn, I can tell that by the feel of it, but it might be from like the 80s. I don't know. This one I think is a Macawa fabric. It's got little gold flecks on it. Again, I can't be sure because I was gifted it, so I'm just using what I've got. And then I've got a 1 1/4 inch square of a fabric that's got red on it, and this was cut from a piece of this Liberty fabric. I've never really sewn with Liberty before, so this is going to be fun today. I think this is a pattern called Strawberry Thief, and it's the red version. I was going to do a little bird. I was going to fussy cut a little bird out, but they're too wide, and I didn't want to cut its head and tail off, so I went for this floral motif here instead. So that's what I've cut it from. That piece goes back in my stash. And so we're going to make a log cabin block today. We're going to go for a fairly traditional one. We're going to go for the sunshine and shadow version. So this is a book called Patchwork Quilting. Company's coming. I think it's out of print now. It's this block here that we're going to do. So the picture's down here. So very traditional style of block. I can show you a different version that doesn't have the sunshine and shadow on it. So that's this red one. So this one is a log cabin, but the light and dark fabrics are just scattered randomly. This book is called Quilting in No Time. So I've done a bit of research to find out what works, and I think I've spotted some pitfalls which, if you're a beginner crafter or a beginner quilter, you might fall into these traps. So I'm hoping that I can show you some tricks for avoiding it. The first thing I'm going to do is just put a cross on my fabric. So I've lined up my ruler corner to corner, and I'm just going to put a line across in one direction, a line across in the other, and I'm also going to put a little arrow on the top edge. Now it doesn't matter which side you do it on, but this is going to be my starting edge, and I think from what I understand that one of the trickiest things about a log cabin block is remembering where you started, because we're going to keep rotating it, and it really matters that you know which side you started on. So that's going to help me. I'm going to take my 1 inch, 1 1/4 inch square, and I'm going to line it up at the centre so that the 4 corners of the square sit on those 4 lines, and that means it's absolutely central, like that. And that's stage one. So far so good. Right, we're going to make our light colours. So let's put an L on here. We're going to put our light colours on this half of the square, and we're going to put our dark colours on this side of the square. If you are marking, make sure you do it towards the outer edge, because we're going to gradually cover this up. And we're going to start really simple. We're going to take our light coloured strip, we want it right side down, and we're just going to line it up with the edge of that central square block. And I'm going to take a pin and just pin it in place like that. And then I'm going to mark a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just lining up the 1/4 inch marker on my ruler with the edge of the fabric, and I'm just going to rule across like that. Okay, so now I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to run them along the edge of that centre block and just trim. And I've got a raggedy edge there, it really doesn't matter. And it also doesn't matter if it's a little bit wider, you just don't want it to be narrower than that block. I've got some machine cotton just threaded up into my needle. I've knotted the end, and I'm just going to come up through both layers, or all 3 layers, so up from the back, through the red square, through the strip that I've just put on, and I'm going to do the tiniest running stitch that I can manage. So teeny tiny stitches, and every 3 or 4 stitches, somewhere in the middle, I'm going to put a little back stitch in. So you can do this by loading the stitches up onto the needle, which I will do. There you go, I've done 2 there. My needle's a bit tight on this fabric. You want to try and keep them very close together, these little stitches. And I'm going to finish with a back stitch. Just make sure you haven't gathered up, so I'm just sliding my nail along the top there just to make sure that that is sitting flat, and then you can actually leave it attached because we're going to stitch again in a minute. I'm just going to finish it off just so that I can show you clearly what I'm doing. Right, out comes the pin, and then I'm going to fold that back on itself. I'm not going to press it, I'm just going to finger press it. So you can use a seam roller just to press that nice and flat. This is a super cheap one. I hate to say, but I think I got it from Temu. But you can pick them up in lots of places. So that's our first strip. That wasn't too bad, was it? Right, we're going to take our light fabric again, and we are going to now lay that. We're going to use the centre block as a guide, and we're going to lay it along the edge of the centre block on our second side. going to pop a pin in, like that, and I'm going to come back with my, let's trim it first. I think it's fine to just slide your scissors under, snip that off, and I'm going to come back in and put in my seam allowance, like that. So now I've rotated my block, it would be easy to start, particularly once we've been round a few times, it would be easy to start forgetting which way up the block is supposed to be. So that little arrow there is going to really help me, I think, particularly as I have a lot of brain fog these days. Very easily confused. I've just been to pick Rick up from work, and he was asking what I'd been up to today, and I knew that I'd worked all morning. Could I tell him what I'd done? Could I buffalo? I had no idea. It took about 15 minutes for me to remember what I'd spent the first half of my day doing, and that is pretty much par for the course at the moment, so that little arrow is going to really help me out. So I might need a different needle, you know. Do you find that after a while your needles it's piercing the fabric fine, but it's just not sliding through the fabric? Right, I'm just going to put a little back stitch in on this stitch. So those little back stitches just kind of lock the stitches a little bit. I'm just repositioning that as I go to make sure that it follows the edge of that centre block. So you can see I'm loading up a few stitches onto the needle. Now, I paused the video and thought I'd clicked start again and didn't. So there might be a chunk missing, but I'll show you what I've done. So I've got a piece of my dark fabric, and just like before I've rotated it round. So we've done this side and this side, we're now working on this side. So I line it up along the edge of the centre square and lining up with the right hand edge of this second piece that we've put on. I pinned it in, chopped it off at the edge of that centre square, so just cutting along down from the first piece right the way down, marked the seam allowance, and I've just stitched that again. And so now we're going to turn that one back, and now we're starting to see that contrast beginning to emerge. So I've got my seam roller and I'm just going to press that back. There we go, it's going okay. Oh, the stress. Right, so piece 4 goes right the way across the panel, so we're going to line it up again. It's a bit frayed that end, let's do this end. We're going to line it up again with the edge of that red block in the middle. We're going to make sure it comes right up to the edge of that first piece that we put on, the first strip piece. I'm going to pin it in place. like that, and then I'm going to trim it off so that it lines up with the edge of that first dark piece that I've put on, like that. I'm not going to worry about the overlaps, I'm only interested in the edge of this red piece, so I can just see it, only just. I'm going to mark in my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So this is all that I did with this other piece. I've swapped out my needle as well, by the way. I unthreaded it by accident and thought it was a good opportunity to switch to another needle, and my goodness, what a difference it's made. I'd love to know if you know why needles stop passing through the fabric. So it was puncturing the fabric fine, but it wouldn't slide through the fabric. Why is that? I would love to know. I would love to know. Is it some sort of corrosion? What is it? It's a decent quality needle. So I'm just trying to keep my stitches super tiny, and just if you want to load stitches onto your needle, it's easier if you move the fabric rather than the needle. So if you try and weave with the needle will have a natural tipping point that will mean that it's really hard to make your stitches any smaller than that demands. Whereas if you move the fabric, you can actually get really tiny stitches. I'm just not very fast. I'm not a very fast stitcher anyway, but I'm really not very fast at this. I've also got my finger on the back, making sure that the needle is coming through all the layers, because particularly on this one where you've got the seam turn, the seams turned back, and the other block, sometimes you're going through 4 or 5 layers of fabric, so it really helps to keep your finger on the back of where the needle is supposed to be coming out, making sure that it is actually coming all the way through to the other side of the fabric. As long as you're gentle, you don't have to stab yourself. So just going along with my nail just to spread those out, and then that's my little locking stitch. Out comes the pin. Now you can see I've put it down with this one facing up. I'm going to lose track if I'm not careful, so I'm going to turn it so that the arrow is on the top, like that. Fold it back, seam roller, like that. And that is the beginning of my log cabin. I like it. I like that this isn't too strongly red. I was worried about putting red at the middle of this sort of kind of purpley blue. I'm loving this fabric. I think it's looking nice. So that's essentially it. We just start the process again now. So we get our light again because we're on a light side, and we're going to put a piece on, lining up with the edge of this piece here. So these edges might be a bit wibbly wobbly, so we definitely want to line up with the edge of that central piece, and we want to match it to the edge of the piece on side 2, like that. I'm going to pop a pin in, and I'm going to trim it off to the edge of the piece on side 4, our second dark piece. Just trim it like that. seam allowance, and then I'll stitch along there. So I will film the rest. I might speed it up and put some music over it just so that you can see the process of what I'm doing. And if I notice anything else, I'll come back in and explain. But this arrow I think is going to save me, and the fact that I've marked light and dark I think is going to be really helpful. So I'm just going to put these pieces on, and then we'll have a look at the block. Right, I have added strips right up until my block is 6 inches wide, and obviously the edges aren't attached to anything. Now if I was piecing this together straight away I would just stitch it to another block, but I thought I would just tack it down. So I'm going to go in from the front. This is just the same thread that I've been using, and I'm going to just put in some fairly large tacking stitches just around the edge. I've put my knot on the front so that it's easy to remove when the time comes, and I'm probably 1/4 of an inch inside the outer edge. Really pleased with the way this is looking. And it has been much easier than I thought. The arrow has totally saved me on this one. It's been immensely helpful. I've always been quite scared of attempting more traditional patchwork block designs because I imagine them to be, I mean, they're so beautiful, and I imagine them to be blocks that really skilled and experienced quilters use. And I've done a bit of quilting, but certainly not any traditional quilting to speak of, and so I kind of rule myself out as somebody that can approach these blocks, but I'm determined to get more familiar with quilting techniques, and so I thought as there was no really tricky cutting or anything like that, I thought this one would be a good place to start really. And I'm so glad I did, because I feel like having done this one I could approach something a little bit more tricky. It's often the thought of doing something that's worse than the doing of it. I often find that in life in lots of ways. So having had a go, it, like many things in life, it has been way more straightforward than I ever imagined it would be. So I think just going slowly, taking your time, having a marker to show you where your starting point is, making everything off the same strip, so that really helped as well, that I had a strip that was the width of the fabric, so it was one long strip and I didn't have to pre-cut everything and make sure they were all the right length, so just adding it on and cutting it once I'd pinned it in place, that was really helpful. And I was worried about this outer edge being wider than the others, so obviously with the 1/4 inch seam allowance, the logs of the log cabin finish up at about 1/2 inch. We've got 1/4 inch under there and 1/4 inch under here, so they finish up at 1/2 inch, and this outer one is 3/4 inch. But when I'm attaching blocks together, I'll take another 1/4 inch seam allowance off that, and so they'll all be the same width in the end, so that works out really nicely. So here's my finished log cabin block. Can't believe how straightforward this was actually. I've always been really intimidated by these traditional blocks, but actually it's really straightforward. That little arrow at the top really helped. The just working methodically, going clockwise really helped, and I think it's come out really nicely. I hope it's inspired you to have a go yourself. So if you've enjoyed watching the process of this, please do give me a like. It really helps out the channel, helps other people find these videos. And if you have enjoyed this and you want to carry on with some more patchwork, I will link a video here, and I'll put the Winging It playlist down here so that you can go and explore some other textile art if you are interested. Thanks so much for watching. Join me again soon for another patchwork adventure, and happy stitching. Bye!